My uncle convinced grandmother to change her will at the last minute. The entire family condemned me for greed, but when I showed video, the family meeting turned into chaos. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Long story short, my grandmother raised me since I was 9 after my parents died in an accident. She was everything to me. My rock, my mentor, the person who taught me how to be a decent human being. My grandmother was never wealthy, but she was comfortable. She owned her home outright, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, had decent savings, and a few family heirlooms that meant the world to her. She always told me those heirlooms were meant for me since I was the only one who appreciated their history. "These aren't just things, Robert," she'd say, while showing me the antique pocket watch that belonged to my great-grandfather. "These are our family's memories." Everything was fine until about 8 months ago when my Uncle Charles started showing up regularly. To be honest, Charles was never really present in our lives before. He'd show up for Christmas sometimes, send the occasional birthday card, but that was about it. So when he suddenly became the devoted son, something felt off. At first, I was actually happy about it. Grandmother was getting older, 87, and having more family around seemed like a good thing. I work full-time and couldn't be there every day, so Charles offering to take her to appointments and help with groceries seemed like a blessing. I'm not gonna lie, I should have paid more attention to the little sign. Charles started coming by almost daily. Then he began suggesting that grandmother's regular visitors tired her out too much. Old friends who'd been coming by for decades were told that she was resting or not feeling well today. Her bridge club friends stopped coming. Her church group was told she preferred to pray at home now. Slowly but surely, he was isolating her from everyone, including me. I noticed grandmother was acting differently during my visit, more withdrawn, anxious about Charles returning, checking the time frequently. When I'd ask if everything was okay, she'd just say she was tired, but her eyes told a different story. There was fear there. I tried talking to my cousin Magnolia, Charles's daughter, but she brushed me off, saying her dad was just being helpful, and maybe I was jealous of not being the favorite anymore. Then came the bombshell. Grandmother passed away in her sleep 3 weeks ago. It was devastating. I had seen her just 2 days prior and she seemed okay, just tired. What happened next was even worse. The reading of the will was scheduled exactly a week after the funeral. I expected the standard stuff, grandmother's house going to me as she'd always said, the family heirlooms distributed according to her wishes, and her modest savings split between her children and grandchildren. But when everyone gathered at her house, Charles already had this smug look that made my stomach turn. The will was completely different from what grandmother had told me for years. Everything, the house, the savings, even the family heirlooms, was left to Charles, with a small stipend set aside for each grandchild. The will was dated just 11 days before she died. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't my grandmother's wishes. This was wrong. When I questioned this, pointing out that grandmother had always said the house would be mine since I'd helped maintain it for years and even contributed to the property taxes, the room erupted. Charles called me greedy. My cousins piled on, saying I was just upset about not getting a payout. Even my Aunt Michelle, who normally stays out of family drama, suggested I was being disrespectful to grandmother's final wishes. I tried explaining that these weren't her wishes, that something felt wrong, that the timing was suspicious, but no one listened. Instead, Charles dramatically pulled out his handkerchief, wiped away non-existent tears, and talked about how he'd taken care of Mother in her final days while Robert was too busy with his own life. That's when I lost it. Not in the yelling sense, but in the cold, calm anger sense. I looked him straight in the eyes and said I didn't believe the will reflected grandmother's true wishes and that I would be looking into it. Charles actually laughed and told me to go ahead and waste your money on lawyers, kid. What he doesn't know is that about 4 months ago, when grandmother first started acting strange, she pulled me aside during one of my visits when Charles was out running an errand. She seemed scared, asking if I could help her document some things just in case. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I agreed. She asked me to record our conversations on my phone, saying she wanted her real wishes documented somewhere safe. I have recordings of her explicitly stating how she wanted her estate divided. I have her talking about how Charles was pressuring her about the will, about how he'd taken her credit cards, about how he was monitoring her phone calls. In one particularly heartbreaking moment, she whispers about being afraid to eat food he prepared. After the disastrous family meeting, Charles told me I needed to accept reality and vacate grandmother's house within 30 days, as it was now his property. Everyone watched in silence as he essentially kicked me out of the home I'd partially grown up in. No one stood up for me. Not a single person. I left without arguing, but I'm not giving up. Not by a long shot. I've spent the last week going through grandmother's papers that I had stored in my apartment. She had given me a box of important documents for safekeeping months ago. There are bank statements showing unusual withdrawals. There are notes in her handwriting documenting strange occurrences. And most importantly, there's her previous will, dated just last year, that tells a completely different story about her wishes. I haven't told anyone in my family about the recordings or documents yet. They've all been texting me about accepting grandmother's decision and respecting her memory. My cousin Rachel even had the nerve to suggest I seek therapy for my unhealthy attachment issues. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with someone who specializes in elder abuse and contested wills. I have no idea where this will lead or how ugly it might get. But I know one thing for certain. My grandmother was taken advantage of, and I won't rest until justice is served. Charles thinks he's won. He thinks I'm just going to roll over and accept this. He has no idea what's coming. To be honest, I never thought I'd be the type of person to get involved in family drama like this. I've always been the one to avoid conflict, to try to keep the peace. But some things are worth fighting for, and my grandmother's dignity is definitely one of them. I'll update when I have more to share. Right now, I need to organize all this evidence and prepare for war. Update. Hey everyone, it's been almost 3 weeks since my last post, and things have escalated. To be honest, I've been hesitant to post an update because once I put this all in writing, there's no going back. But I need to get this off my chest. First off, thank you to everyone who commented on my last post. Reading your support helped me through some really dark nights. I've been sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, spending every waking moment piecing together what happened to my grandmother. The day after I made my last post, I met with someone who specializes in elder abuse cases. I brought the recordings of my grandmother, the old will, and the documents she had given me for safekeeping. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end, they were taking extensive notes and telling me I had a strong case to contest the will. There was clear evidence of undue influence, they said. I felt validated for the first time since this nightmare began. But validation doesn't win cases. Evidence does. And I needed more. I started by digging deeper into those bank statements I mentioned. Turns out, the unusual withdrawals were just the tip of the iceberg. Over the last 6 months of my grandmother's life, Charles had systematically drained nearly $63,000 from her accounts. He didn't take it all at once. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it was $500 here, $800 there. A pattern of withdrawals disguised as household expenses and medical costs. I know my grandmother's actual expenses. Her medication cost $230 a month. Her utilities averaged $180. Groceries, maybe $300. Where did the other thousands go each month? Certainly not to her care. But the real smoking gun came when I accessed my grandmother's email account. Yeah, I still had her password. She had asked me to help her set it up years ago, and she never changed it. I wasn't expecting to find much, maybe some correspondence with friends or subscription confirmation. Instead, I found a goldmine. Charles had been emailing with someone about convincing Mother to update her arrangement. There were messages discussing how to isolate R from the situation. R being me, obviously, and most damning of all, an email from just 2 weeks before her death where Charles told this person he was working on getting the paperwork finalized before it's too late. I literally had to walk away from my computer when I found that. The calculated coldness of it. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned, methodical. My own uncle had been plotting to steal my grandmother's estate for months while isolating her from everyone who cared about her. I printed everything, every email, every bank statement. I created a timeline showing the correlation between Charles's increased presence in grandmother's life and the strange financial activity. I organized the recordings chronologically, marking the ones where she explicitly stated her wishes regarding the house and heirloom. Then I did something that might have been stupid, but I couldn't help myself. I texted Charles asking to meet privately about finding a resolution to this situation. No family, no outsiders, just us. He agreed surprisingly quickly. We met at a coffee shop near my apartment. I hadn't seen him since the will reading, and the smug look was still plastered on his face. I hate to admit it, but it took everything I had not to lose my cool right then and there. I started calmly, saying I had concerns about grandmother's final wishes and suggesting we find a compromise that honored what she really wanted. Charles just sat there, sipping his coffee, occasionally nodding. When I finished speaking, he set down his cup, leaned forward, and told me I should be grateful for the generous stipend I was receiving. That's when I mentioned I had recordings. His face changed instantly. The smug smile vanished. He asked what kind of recordings. I told him I had grandmother explaining her real wishes, expressing fear of him, describing how he was controlling her finances and monitoring her communications. I expected denial. What I got was worse. Charles laughed, actually laughed, and asked if I thought some confused ramblings of an old woman would hold up against a legally executed will. Then he told me if I pursued this, he would make sure the entire family knew I had been manipulating grandmother for years, recording her without proper consent, trying to steal what rightfully belonged to everyone. Long story short, he threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't back down. When I didn't immediately cave, he got up, leaned over the table, and told me I had no idea who I was messing with. Then he left without paying for his coffee. Real classy. That night, my phone exploded with messages from family members. Aunt Michelle asking how I could be so cruel. Cousin Rachel saying I was dishonoring grandmother's memory. Cousin Magnolia calling me a manipulative liar. Apparently, Charles had already started his smear campaign, telling everyone I had been financially abusing grandmother for years and was now trying to contest the will out of greed. The worst part? Some of them believed him. People who have known me my entire life, who know how much I loved grandmother, were suddenly questioning my character. It was surreal. I tried defending myself to a couple of them, but their minds were made up. Charles had gotten to them first, and his version of events had taken root. I spent that night feeling completely alone. I won't lie. I considered giving up, maybe taking the small inheritance and walking away from this toxic mess of a family situation. But then I remembered the recordings. I remembered grandmother's voice, the fear in it when she talked about Charles. I remembered her asking me to help her, to make sure her wishes were respected. I'm not gonna lie, that memory lit a fire in me that I didn't know existed. This isn't just about the house or the money anymore. This is about justice for the woman who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who is no longer here to defend herself. The next morning, I got a text from Charles. The family was meeting this Saturday to discuss distribution of personal effects from grandmother's house. Everyone would be there. Charles suggested I stay away since I was causing unnecessary drama. That text was the final push I needed. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I met again with my legal advisor. I organized all my evidence into a presentation that even a child could understand. I had the recordings transferred to a USB drive and cleaned up so grandmother's voice is crystal clear. I even practiced what I would say, knowing I'd only have one shot at this. Tomorrow is the family meeting. Charles doesn't know I'm coming. He doesn't know what I have. He thinks his threats worked, that I've backed down like I always have in the past. He's always seen me as the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the one who avoids conflict at all costs. He's about to learn how wrong he is. I'm bringing everything, the financial records, the emails, the recorded conversations. I'm going to lay it all out in front of the entire family. Let them hear grandmother's voice describing how Charles took her credit cards away. Let them see the bank statements showing the missing money. Let them read the emails where he plotted to change her will. For once in my life, I'm not backing down. For once, I'm not trying to keep the peace. Some things are worth fighting for, and my grandmother's last wishes are definitely one of them. I'll update after the meeting. Either way, nothing will be the same after tomorrow. I just hope that somewhere, grandmother is watching and that she knows I'm fighting for her. Wish me luck. I think I'm going to need it. Update 2. It's been a little over a month since everything went down, and I'm still processing what happened. I've started and deleted this update at least a dozen times. To be honest, I wasn't sure if I'd ever post again, but I feel like I owe you all some closure after your support on my previous post. The day of the family meeting arrived. I barely slept the night before, going over my evidence again and again, making sure everything was in order. I dressed carefully that morning. Nothing fancy, just a clean button-down and jeans. I wanted to look put together, but not like I was trying too hard. I remember standing in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing the determined look on my face. This wasn't the conflict-avoidant Robert everyone was used to. This was someone else, entirely. I arrived at grandmother's house exactly 15 minutes after the meeting was scheduled to start. I wanted everyone to be there, settled in, comfortable. The driveway was full of cars. All my family members had shown up. Through the window, I could see them gathered in the living room. Charles standing at the head of the room like he owned the place, which, according to the fraudulent will, he did. Walking up to that door was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. But there was no turning back now. When I walked in, the room went silent. Charles's face shifted from surprise to annoyance in seconds. Aunt Michelle looked uncomfortable. Cousin Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes. Cousin Magnolia stood protectively beside her father. I noticed Charles had already started boxing up some of grandmother's most precious belongings. Her antique tea set was packed away in a corner, bubble wrap peeking out of the box. Charles immediately started with the dismissive attitude, asking why I was there when I clearly wasn't wanted. He suggested I take my inheritance and leave the family in peace. The way he emphasized inheritance, like he was doing me some grand favor by tossing me scraps, made something snap inside me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just calmly set my laptop on the coffee table and pulled out a folder of documents. I explained that before anyone touched another item in this house, they needed to see something important. Charles tried to interrupt, but surprisingly, Aunt Michelle shushed him. I think she was curious what I could possibly have that warranted such confidence. I started with the bank statement, not the most emotional evidence, but the most straightforward. I passed copies around showing the systematic withdrawals from grandmother's accounts. Over $200,000 in total over 8 months, not the $63,000 I initially thought. I had color-coded the suspicious transaction and included a spreadsheet showing grandmother's actual expenses versus the withdrawals. The difference was staggering. The room was dead silent as everyone flipped through the pages. Charles started to say something about managing mother's finances and legitimate expenses, but his voice trailed off as people continued reading. Magnolia was the first to look up at her father with questioning eyes. Next came the email. I had printed full exchanges, not just snippets, so there could be no claim of taking things out of context. Emails where Charles discussed isolating grandmother from family and friends. Emails where he talked about manipulating her into changing her will. Emails where he actually joked about waiting for her to die so he could finally live the good life. That last one made Aunt Michelle physically recoil. Charles's face was getting redder by the second. He tried to grab the papers from Michelle's hands, but she pulled away. He started claiming the emails were fake, that I had manufactured them to steal what was rightfully his. His voice was getting louder, more desperate. That's when I played the first recording. Grandmother's voice filled the room, frail but clear, describing how Charles had taken her credit cards, how he was monitoring her phone calls, how he only let her see people he approved of. Her voice shook as she described being afraid in her own home. Then came the crucial part, her explicitly stating that she wanted the house to go to me, with specific items listed for each family member, and the remainder of her estate split equally among her descendants. The second recording was worse. Grandmother whispering because Charles was in the next room, telling me she was afraid he was putting something in her food because she always felt strange after meals he prepared. Her once sharp mind confused and foggy. Her begging me to help her, but being afraid of what Charles might do if he found out she was talking to me. By the third recording, Charles was on his feet, shouting that I was manipulating a confused old woman, that I had coerced her. He lunged for my laptop, but I was ready for that. I stepped back, letting him stumble forward, making a scene. That's when Aunt Michelle asked the question that changed everything. She asked Charles where the money went. He couldn't answer, or wouldn't. He started rambling about expenses, about how difficult it was caring for grandmother, about how ungrateful everyone was for his sacrifice. But the look in his eyes gave him away. There was guilt there, and fear. The money was gone, spent on whatever vices or debts Charles had been hiding from the family for years. What happened next still feels surreal. The family that had been united against me just days before turned on Charles like a pack of wolves. Years of suspicious behavior suddenly made sense to them. Times when money had gone missing from family gathering, valuable items that had disappeared from relatives' homes after Charles visited. His constant financial struggles, despite a good income. Charles must have sensed he was losing control because he changed tactics, becoming pathetically conciliatory, claiming he'd made mistakes but had grandmother's best interests at heart. Nobody was buying it. When he realized that, something dark crossed his face. He turned to me and said he'd make me regret this, that I had no idea who I was messing with. That was his final mistake, threatening me in front of witnesses after all the evidence I'd just presented. Aunt Michelle physically stepped between us, telling Charles to leave before she called authorities. His own daughter, Magnolia, wouldn't even look at him anymore. Charles stormed out, but not before warning everyone they'd regret taking my side. The slam of the door echoed through the silent house. The aftermath has been both satisfying and sad. The will was officially contested based on undue influence and elder abuse. My evidence was overwhelming. The judge invalidated the fraudulent will and reinstated grandmother's previous one. The house is now mine, as grandmother always intended. The family heirlooms have been distributed according to her wishes. The remaining assets were frozen pending investigation into the missing funds. Charles's life has completely unraveled. His wife filed for divorce after learning about the financial manipulation and elder abuse. His employer terminated him when the investigation hit the local paper. He's facing criminal charges for elder financial abuse and fraud. Most of his assets have been seized, and he's living in a cheap apartment on the edge of town. No one in the family will speak to him, not even Magnolia, who finally admitted she'd had suspicions for years, but couldn't bring herself to believe her father could do such things. As for me, I've changed too. The quiet conflict-avoidant Robert is gone. I pushed for the harshest possible penalties against Charles, giving investigators every piece of evidence I had. When his attorney approached about a potential settlement to avoid criminal charges, I refused. When family members suggested showing mercy since he's still family, I shut that down immediately. Grandmother deserved justice, and Charles deserved consequences. Last week I saw Charles at the grocery store. He looked terrible, aged a decade in a month, unshaven, shoulders hunched. He tried to approach me, probably to beg for forgiveness or ask me to speak to the prosecutor on his behalf. I just walked past him without a word, the look of desperation in his eyes as I ignored him completely. I won't pretend it didn't feel good. Is it petty to enjoy seeing him suffer? Maybe, but after what he did to grandmother, isolating her, scaring her, making her final months miserable, I can't find it in me to feel bad for him. Some people say revenge doesn't solve anything, that it just perpetuates pain. But sometimes, revenge is justice. Grandmother's house is quiet now. I've been slowly sorting through her things, finding notes she left in books, little treasures tucked away in drawers. Sometimes I swear I can feel her presence, approving of what I did. I know that sounds strange, but it brings me comfort. The family is healing, slowly. Trust has been broken, But we're finding our way back to each other. Except for Charles, of course. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. To everyone who encouraged me to fight, thank you. You helped me find strength I didn't know I had. Sometimes standing up for what's right means being the bad guy in someone else's story. I can live with that.